I had to mute the word men from my Twitter account for over 2 years because it got to a point where every single time I saw a tweet with the word men in it, it was just trashing men. I really want to emphasize that I empathize with women. I was forced at the age of 14 and 15 to stay with my mother and my younger sister. And I became the man of the house. I really deeply support women. I really deeply respect women. And I really deeply want to continue to understand them and love on them. Anything that I might say in this video is not to attack women. I actually don't like the idea of men versus women, like pitting them against each other. But if anything, it's, can we come a little bit more to an understanding so that we can find the best way to move forward together? I'll share my experience. You continue to share your experience, and let's see like the best way that, we can move like through certain things, even if it means like me putting a little bit more of whatever's hurting me like aside for the sake of the cause.
I think a lot of people don't realize when they're not authentically relating to each other. And I think that that's where a lot of this really gets messy, is when we're relating to each other from a place of ego to ego. And I would say anytime any one person is calling another person trash, whether like man, woman, non-binary, any gender, any person, when you're placing that kind of generalization on someone, you're really not looking at the whole person and what's going into even the insecurities that they're acting on. Men are like, well, women don't understand this about us and our vulnerabilities. And like, let's say how scary it is to approach a woman, and all of these thoughts that are going through our heads about our own self-worth and how women are going to respond to us. And then on the flip side, women are like, well, you don't understand the vulnerabilities that we constantly have dealing with men. And I think that that's what a lot of this conversation comes down to, is we aren't aware of which like deeper unmet needs and vulnerabilities are often driving our social interactions.
Exactly.
And that's why I find it so interesting to hear both of you speak on this topic, because I think that women are a little bit more, like, we're socialized to be a little bit more forthcoming about what we feel vulnerable about. And I would say actually the women's empowerment movement in some ways has like disempowered women to talk about their vulnerabilities. But I think historically men have talked so little about that, and so little about what's in their shadow and what comes up for them in various different interactions, that I think we end up with, all of these like social games where people are trying to have their needs and vulnerabilities addressed and met by the other without explicitly stating what they are.
Oh, that's so much. There's so many things. Like it's a lot. Being a human being is a lot. It's hard. There's a lot of things. Not only a lot of things that you have to be as an individual, but then relative to your parents or to society or to someone you want to attract, or your friends that you're trying to fit into, or your customers or whatever, right? Like we're always having to take whatever our instinctual whatever and try to transmogrify it into something palatable or something acceptable, right? And I think that starts from as young as, a toddler.
I do think that men probably start off like way back then being cavalier in this way, but then women got conditioned to like, oh, this is how a man is supposed to be like. But then they're also saying like, but I don't want a man that's like this. And so then the men who are trying to not be cavalier, they're like, all right, well, let me show you more respect. And it's, what? Well, you're not being like that, man. It's like, okay, well, let me be a little bit more cavalier. It's like, oh, well, you're not being respectful. And it's like, what do you want from me?
I imagine that there are people laying in bed by themselves, not looking at their phone, and they're thinking about like, oh, the fucking patriarchy. Ugh. And it's like, you're in bed by yourself. Why is that torturing you? It doesn't need to torture you right now. There's a separation that I think is healthy that kind of needs to happen.
It's so easy to just dissociate from these like difficult conversations and go, okay, there's this whole narrative I can latch onto about how like men don't care about women's feelings. And I feel like men can have the exact same narrative, like, oh, women just want to like be manipulative or whatever. And the problem is that we don't stay with these conversations, and we don't actually like work these issues out very often and actually get to an understanding. There's like this expectation on everyone to already be perfect. So instead of like if Denzel, you say something that pisses me off, like instead of going, okay, let's talk that out. It's so easy to go like, just another like man who doesn't care to understand women,
Bingo.
you
Yeah.
know?
I think the patriarchy as a term, unfortunately, has become the equivalent of saying it was the devil
Oh,
in its
that's good.
esotericness. But like I look at Jupiter and I'm like, it's made of gravy, and like, I don't like gravy. I don't want to see Jupiter ever again. And then just like starting to create all of this internal chaos because of my relationship to an experience that I had with gravy, which is not the experience of Jupiter. Like